saying. That's one of the most important things that we have to go over, right? How were these other groups? How were these Jews? How were these people that God was preaching to? How were they influenced by foreign doctrines? How did they fall into bid'ah? How did they fall into innovation? How did they fall into disbelief? Right? And obviously, it'd be their influence from the man's whims and desires, and that of the customs and traditions that are external to that of the pure religion of the prophets. Right? The guest is here, so I can speak to him, inshallah.
Is my mic actually working now?
Yeah, it's working.
Yes,
Good.
Yes.
I'm sorry about that earlier. I actually had to go into my sound settings, and somehow one of my audio settings in the actual hard drive stuff had turned off, and I had to do some troubleshooting stuff and turn it back on. So anyway, it's working now.
All right. So can you introduce yourself to us? What type of Christian are you? And what have you heard so far? What do you think?
Well, I would describe myself as an unorthodox Christian. So I'm certainly not of any orthodox denomination. I actually reject the Trinity myself. I don't believe that the Trinity is biblical.
Beautiful.
So that's kind of unique. I certainly believe Paul actually has a very good understanding of what the previous scriptures say. I think he's very well in line with the Torah and the prophets. So I'm happy to. There's quite a few subjects. Obviously, circumcision is one that you've mentioned. There's the laws, obviously. To be honest, you can take your pick and we can go over whichever one you want to tackle first.
Yeah, we can go over circumcision if you'd like.
Okay, so for that one, I'd go to Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 25 and 26. Hang on, I restarted my computer, so I haven't got all my stuff ready.
Yeah, the circumcision of the hearts, right? This is this is just some sort of understanding of one being purified, right? Of one having a clean heart, clean mind, right? But this doesn't negate that of what is taught within the Old Testament, that the doctrine
it teaches
of circumcision is
that the circumcised are punished with the uncircumcised, and that shows that having a circumcision of the flesh actually has no bearing in any way, shape or form at all. And that the only thing that actually matters at the end of the day is whether your heart is towards God.
Okay, this is very important, right? So do you believe that within the book of Genesis, do you believe that it was an eternal covenant that was given to Abraham, that his descendants and that those who are integrated into his faith will abide by circumcision?
I believe that it has a more profound spiritual meaning, and that the circumcision is of the heart, and that the circumcision is required, and it is a sign of the eternal covenant. But it's not a sign in the flesh. It's a sign. It's a spiritual sign in the heart. It's a change of heart, and that's it.
I got you. So this is very important, right? So I'll read Genesis 17, verse 12 through 14. And you're able to hold to that interpretation, but I would say that your interpretation would be in line with that of Paul's, but it wouldn't be in line with that of James, or it wouldn't be in line of that of Jesus. And I'll prove it in a little bit, right? But Genesis chapter 17, verse 12 through 14 basically says, "For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised, including those born in your household or bought with money from a foreigner." Right? So even the foreigners, right, who you have bought, right, or who you have integrated into that of your family, right? You will integrate them into that of your covenant, and you will get them circumcised as well, right? And those who are not of your offspring, whether born in your household or bought with your money, they must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh, right, not in the heart, not in some form of spirituality.
The heart is flesh in a way, so.
No, but this is exactly what you're saying. You were saying that the heart is some sort of spiritualized idea of circumcision. Right?
Well,
Circumcision of the heart is spiritual, right? It's by grace through faith, right? This isn't what the old prophets taught. Remember Moses, right?
Well,
Moses, he was about to be put to death.
I
This is,
mentioned Jeremiah
uh,
9, verse
yeah.
25 and 26, and I can read them out here. It says, "Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will punish all them which are circumcised with the uncircumcised, Egypt and Judah and Edom and the children of Ammon and Moab, and all that are in the utmost corners that dwell in the wilderness. For all these nations are uncircumcised, and all the house of Israel are uncircumcised in the heart."
Mm,
So it makes no difference. I understand that that's the covenant. We say that the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. Paul talks about how the Old Testament is our tutor to bring us to faith, and the sign of the circumcision of the flesh, and it's to bring us to understanding of circumcision of the heart. But if the heart is circumcised, then that is the important factor. That's what God is concerned about.
okay. I got you, Mr. C. Right, but this is like the issue we're falling into. Right, within Jeremiah chapter 9. Right, Jeremiah
Yeah,
is one who was sent to his people. Jeremiah is one who's
yeah,
formulated in the womb and consecrated as a prophet and anointed to go to all the nations. And he's anointed to call them back to repentance. Why? Because the children of Israel have fell into some horrendous, abhorrent, and grotesque practices and ideas. Right, and time again, they're forsaking their covenant and they're committing idolatry. Right, so
yeah.
for God to say I'm going to punish the circumcised with the uncircumcised, basically he's saying, yeah, that I'm just خلاص, like I've had enough with you people. Time and time again I've given you chances. I've set before you rules and laws, perfect, right, perfect rulings and teachings and laws, and it doesn't matter if you follow one of them. It doesn't matter if you get your children circumcised and then you go worship. It doesn't matter if you get your child
Yeah,
circumcised if in the same
exactly,
breath you're going to go and commit idolatry. Right. This
exactly,
is the
yeah.
issue. No, but this is the issue, that this doesn't mean that you forsake all of the laws that God has given you, right?
But
They
if
forsook
if a
specific
child
laws.
is circumcised when they're 8 days old, and then when they're 20, 25, whatever, they're out doing all sorts of manner of things that no religious person would condone, then it just goes to show that the circumcision of the flesh, it didn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference.
So
It's
why?
just
So why would you think, like, think about this, right? So just to finish the verse in Genesis 17:12 to 14, right? And then I'd like to read you one more verse and like get your understanding of it, right? But basically in Genesis chapter 17, verse 13, whether born in your household or bought with your money, they must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh is to be an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people, and he has broken my covenant, right? And in Exodus chapter 4, verse 24 through 26, right? At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to unalive him, was about to kill him, right? Exodus chapter 4, verse 24 through 26. If what? Right? So Moses, right here, at a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. Surely you are the bridegroom of the blood to me, she said. So the Lord let him alone. At that time, she said, bridegroom of blood, referring to circumcision. All right, so here we see the physical circumcision. We see how important the physical circumcision is to God. We see that God was about to unalive Moses, right? Unalive Moses because he hadn't circumcised his son quick enough, right? And Zipporah came luckily and immediately went and got the process done. So we see that the physical circumcision of the flesh is mentioned in Genesis 17, verse 12 to 14. And we have a specific instance in that of the Old Testament with the greatest of the prophets in the Old Testament being Moses, right? The biggest one to follow, right? Who's almost about to be put to death because he's not circumcising his son quick enough. And the circumcision of the flesh. He didn't say, my son is pure. I'll make sure that he lives in accordance with your teachings, God. He has the circumcision of the heart, right? He's 8 days old. And it was a must. It was a must for him to be circumcised if he wanted to live. Right? And this is just a continuation, right? Like this is very absurd to think that with all of this evidence, right, with Genesis chapter 17, verse 12 to 14, and with Exodus chapter 4, verse 24 to 26, right, and with James, right, specifically James, in Acts chapter 21, verse 18 through 24. Right? It is absurd to think that one verse within the book of Jeremiah, right, that's condemning that of Israel and saying that, oh, you guys are all guilty by association, right, that you guys have committed idolatry. It doesn't matter if you abstain from this or abstain from that.
No,
It doesn't matter
but
if you follow this
you're
rule or
missing the
follow that
point.
rule.
You're
The point
missing the
is,
point. Sorry.
the point is, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
The,
Go ahead,
the point is that you're claiming that Paul has come up with a new teaching, that he is the one that stands out from everybody else, and that what did you described him as
The
a few
anomaly.
words earlier, so
Anomaly,
an anomaly. So
Mhm.
now what I'm showing you is that if you look in the book of Jeremiah, you can find the prophets in the Old Testament actually expressing the same sentiment of how it's the circumcision of the heart that is going to be the thing that matters at the end of the day. So because I can show it to you in Jeremiah, the same sentiment, it means that Paul did not invent it and he's not an anomaly. So we can then debate how serious or not it is in terms of when you're in the Old Testament and under the law. But the point is that Paul is not an anomaly because he understands what Jeremiah is teaching about circumcision of the heart being
I got
being
you.
the important part.
I got you.
So
I got you, Steve.
Paul's not an anomaly there.
I
That's
got you. I
my
got you,
point.
Steve. I got you. I got you. All right. And I think you made like some good points. All right. I like to address them. All right. But so whenever it comes to him quoting this passage of Jeremiah, right, Paul is known for misquoting scripture. Paul is known for misusing scripture. Like what I quoted earlier, whenever I was just speaking about Paul, how he takes Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 26 through 28. All right. Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 26 to 28, where he talks about the curse. Right. And where God is commanding that of Moses, and he's saying that I've given you a law, right? I've given you a
Yeah,
blessing,
a
and I've given
blessing
you a
and a
curse.
curse. So
Yeah.
shall
What
I?
is the blessing? What is the blessing? The blessing is living in accordance to the statutes and the commands
No.
and the rulings and the
If
teachings that were given to Moses.
can you get up Exodus 32 and we'll look at, I think it's verse like 7 to 11 or something. It might be 7
Sure,
to
that's
13.
fine. That's fine, but why
Exodus
would we stray
32,
away from
please.
Deuteronomy? Yeah, but the issue is,
Because
Steve, why would we
it
stray away?
explains the curse. If you want to understand the curse, you need to look at the whole
We know the
context
curse,
of the
but
Bible.
brother, what you're missing is, look, you're sort of going to the other extreme, right? Because I can quote you so many passages from the Old Testament where it talks about the physical adherence to the law along with spirituality, right? So for instance, if you actually read in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, right? What does it say? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all of your strength. Deuteronomy 10, it says, and now Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and to observe the Lord's commands and decrees, right? So many other passages, it does talk about the spirituality aspect of it. But you cannot take that as a precedence and do away with the physical law. It goes both hand in hand. That is exactly why Jesus
Exactly.
actually tells his disciples and the crowds that do everything that the Pharisees are asking you to do, right? But don't be hypocrites, or whatever they're teaching you in essence, right? But don't be hypocrites like them, right? In other words, your heart has to be there, right? What Paul is doing and what you're trying to do, essentially, that's what, you guys are Christians, obviously, that's what you guys are trying to imply, that Paul is saying the circumcision of the heart, the Jeremiah passage that you're pointing out, but I highlighted the portion over there. I don't know if you noticed, and I can bring it up again. What does it say over there about circumcision? It says circumcision in the flesh only. In other words, if you're circumcised, if you just are offering all of these sacrifices, you're performing all of these rituals, but you're not doing it from your heart. The
Yeah,
spirituality aspect is
it
missing.
has to come from the
Then,
heart. The circumcision
absolutely.
of the heart is what
But
matters.
that's why I said, so what you're doing is you're going to the other extreme, where the people of Israel, they went to the other extreme. But God's ways or the prophets, and that's exactly what Jesus taught as well, is offering the or doing going about it in the middle path, right? So the spiritual aspect as well as the physical aspect, it goes hand in hand, right?
So,
Now, Deuteronomy chapter 11, I'm going to say this one last thing and then you guys can inshallah continue. Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 1, what does it say? You shall love God and you shall keep all his laws in all of the days, right? Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2 says something similar. You shall not add to the law, nor should you subtract from the law. It is supposed to be forever. It doesn't say anywhere that, it will be done away with at some point, right? And only the spirituality aspect will continue. No, it says specifically that, and then also Moses in his last sermon, what does he actually say? He says specifically, and it's obviously God relaying this message to him, that the law is not too far away from you, right? You're
It's in your
capable
mouth
of
and
doing
in your heart, and
Yeah.
you when you believe and confess, and that's it.
Correct.
Paul copies it. Yeah, it's just belief and confession. It's not keeping numerous laws. But
No,
with
you're
what
misquoting
you've
it.
just
That's not
said,
what Moses says.
with
Moses
what
said,
you've just said,
okay.
rather than going to Exodus 32, I would now like to go to Ezekiel 25.
No, but
Sorry,
before
Ezekiel
jumping to
20,
different verses,
verse
can you?
25.
No, brother.
That's
But
that's how
before
that's
you,
how Bible study works, dude. You have to look at various
no,
verses to
Yeah,
understand.
I understand.
So,
But what are you trying to imply from there? You're going to show me
well,
another
do you want to
similar.
have a look, or are you
Brother,
just going to
brother,
interrupt
can you
and
allow me to
assume
finish?
what I'm going to say? I'm going to show you information
Yeah,
from the Bible that's
can you
going to
allow
be
me to finish?
relevant to the case.
Can you allow me to finish? Or are we going to talk past each other? Okay.
I would like it
What
if
I'm
you would
trying to
allow
say
me to
is
show
this.
the verse, but
Look,
go on.
What I'm trying to say is this. Can you at least deal with the points that I actually brought
I'm
up?
trying to.
Brought up,
I'm
right?
telling you where to go and look at the Bible.
Instead of bunny hopping and us going to 20 different verses, because what are you going to try to show? You're going to try to show another verse similar to the one that you showed us in Jeremiah, right? The circumcision of heart, the spirituality aspect.
You're
with you
making
over there. I'm
assumptions
not
and you're
denying that.
wrong.
What I'm saying is
You're making
that
assumptions
the
and you're
law is
wrong.
not supposed to be done away with. None of the prophets ever taught this.
You're making assumptions and you're wrong. Can you please get up the verse so
I know
show
the
you?
verse. I know the verse that he's mentioning. So basically,
let's bring it up so he doesn't. Okay, so
Get up Ezekiel 20, 25, and 26.
20, 25. Okay, and then after that, you will actually deal with the contentions that we brought, right? Okay.
I'm dealing with them now with this verse, dude.
Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so I gave them other statutes that were not good and laws through which they could not live. Right, so I defiled them through their own gifts, the sacrifice of every firstborn, that I might fill them with the horror so that they would know that I am the Lord. So what law is that? It's saying here, so I gave them other statutes that were not good. What's... We're talking about the blessing and the curses of the law. So,
Steve, you need to understand, bro. You need to understand. This verse is very, very against you. Very against you. This is God speaking. This is God speaking. If you read the context, Ezekiel 20, if you read verses 18 through 25, you would understand. And right here, verse 26 is telling you that God defiled them through their gifts, the sacrifice of every firstborn. God made these Israelites sacrifice their children.
So how well do you know the timeline of the Torah? Because what happened is that God, he set the Israelites free from Egypt, and they went into the wilderness, and God told them to go into the land of Canaan. But when they listened to the spies, then they remained in the wilderness for 40 years. Yes. And whilst they were in the wilderness, God gave them 10 commandments, and that was because they had disobeyed listening to his voice.
Yes, exactly. But what did they disobey?
After they had received the 10 commandments by God speaking them as a thunderous voice, Moses then went away to receive them as on stone tablets. And when Moses was away for 40 days, all the Israelites, they started making the golden calf. They had that golden calf idol, and they started
It was
worshipping
Aaron. It
it.
was Aaron,
And
according to you.
exactly, and they started
Exodus
giving
32, verse 1 to 7.
sacrifice, and that's in Exodus 32, which was the
32,
other
verse 1
verse
to
I was
7.
going to bring up.
Yep.
And after they made the golden calf, God was so angry with them that he was going to kill them all. It says in Exodus 32, it says, Moses, leave me
Moses
alone
pleaded for them.
that my wrath may wax hot against them, because he was that angry. He was going to kill them all of them there and then, and he was just going to make a new nation out of Moses. But Moses said, no, don't do it. So what, and if you look at the reason that Moses actually says, don't do it because the Egyptians will speak. He didn't say don't do it because they're your children. He said don't do it because the Egyptians will speak. And so the solution, the plan that God came up with was that he gave them a law. He gave them the Levitical law, and it's a curse. It's that law. Nobody can keep it. You cannot live by that law. And so God gave them statutes that were not good, and through which they could not live. And I defiled them in their own gifts. That's all the animal sacrifice that's in the law of Moses. That's the same animal sacrifice that they gave to the golden calf. And it's a pollution. The law of Moses that has that pollution in it, that's the pollution that they gave the golden calf.
I got you. Steve, let's address these points. Let's address these points because these are very important. Okay. So first point, or one of the points that you made, is that no one can keep up the entirety of the works of the law. This is completely false. Biblically speaking, yes, people were able to keep up perfectly, right?
Only
the works of the law.
Only Jesus has ever kept the law.
No.
According to the Bible, he's the only one that's ever
Steve, you
kept
need
the
to
law.
be quiet. Look, when you made your points, we were quiet. Now listen to the brother, all right?
Yeah,
appreciate it.
please, Steve. Right. So you're saying Jesus is the only one who could live in accordance and perfection to that of the law. Okay. Read Luke chapter 1 verse Luke chapter 1 verse 5. All right. Luke 1:5. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. All right. Let's read verse 6.
Right
Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. Right? Blamelessly. So what can we understand? What can we infer? That it wasn't impossible. God in Deuteronomy chapter 30 says, what I'm commanding you today is not too hard for you. All right? The very words are in your mouth. All right, you're like basically saying that this is not too hard for you. This will be a trial. This will be a tribulation for you. But my laws and my rulings and my teachings will be beneficent for you. All right, and we see that it wasn't just Jesus who was able to live in accordance to the law perfectly. Right, which we as Muslims would say, yes, Jesus did strive and do his utmost best and living in accordance to the laws and the rulings and the teachings that were given to him by God. We would agree with you. No problem, no issue there. Right, but also in the Bible, we have other occurrences. We have other.
Sorry guys, I forgot I was recording now. I just started doing my own thing. Let's get back to it.
Passages where, like
Job.
what we were just read, like Job as well. Yeah, Job as well.
Yeah, Job is another one. Verse 8, verse 1, and then Luke, like the brother said, Elizabeth.
Luke chapter 1, verse 5 through 6. Right, Elizabeth and that of Zechariah. Right.
And also you have Noah in Genesis 6 being seen as righteous as well.
Exactly. All right. So these are righteous men. These are righteous men who obeyed the commands and the statutes of God. Bro, God's religion is not a buffet. God's religion is not a buffet.
Yeah,
this is what's being reiterated in Ezekiel.
Daniel are described as having achieved their own righteousness in the Old Testament. I am aware of that. But
yeah, but in Luke specifically, can we say that other people did live in perfection to the law?
What you mentioned about Moses saying that the law is not far off, Paul, he quotes that almost word for word. Misquotes it, if you say. But the point is that if his misquotation of it implies that if you believe in God and that you confess with your mouth, then you are saved. And so the couple that you mentioned that were righteous, we can make the assumption that they were righteous under the same covenant made with Abraham, the covenant of faith, whereby you have faith, you confess that you believe, and you love your one another, then that you're righteous. Because that's how Abraham was righteous. Abraham never read the Torah. He lived
Steve.
before Moses, and he
Steve.
never followed the law
Steve,
of
you're,
Moses.
you're all over the place. Job, over here, we will go back to Luke as well. Does it say over here or not that if you consider my servant Job, there is no one on earth like him. He's blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Is there anything about Job that instead of you reading into the text, can you clearly show me explicitly where it says in the text that he was not able to keep the laws of God? Yes or no?
It's quite evident because if you read Job sacrifices animals every day. He sacrifices animals for his sons, even just in case they have done something.
Stop reading your theology in there and answer the question that I asked you.
The animal sacrifice was a pollution. So when Noah gave animal sacrifice,
stop going on tangents.
Smelt the sweet saviour and said, the heart of man is evil. Animal sacrifice isn't perfect.
All right, Steve.
I'm going to mute him. No, I'm going to ask this question again, okay? What did I ask? Repeat my question to me and then answer that, okay? I don't want to know Pauline theology or your theology. Please repeat the question to me, and if you don't know, or if you did not hear it the first time, I'm willing to repeat it, and then I want a straightforward answer from you, all right? Okay, go ahead. And repeat my question to me, please.
There's no point, dude, because even if I answer your question, you don't want my answer unless I'm answering the way you want me to answer it.
I do want a straightforward answer to the question that I asked. Okay, you're going on long tangents.
You asked,
can Job
be blameless?
We have not gotten. Steve, you're speaking over me again. With all due respect, this is the last time. Okay, so I asked a specific question. Can you repeat my question to you? It was a straightforward question. It's directly pertaining to the topic at hand. We were discussing whether or not Jesus is the only person that was able to keep the Mosaic law perfectly. And we showed you at least 3 people from the New Testament and the Old Testament that clearly states that they kept the law perfectly, blamelessly. And there's not a single sin of them there's mentioned. So please stop reading your Pauline theology into the text and tell us where they sinned.
Am I allowed to talk now?
Yes, you're allowed to talk only if you answer this question.
Right, so do you want me to repeat the question or do you want me to answer the question?
Answer the question straightforward.
Right.
First of all, answer this. Answer this.
Okay.
No. So the first ones that we showed from your New Testament, Elizabeth and Zechariah, is there any sin of theirs mentioned? Yes or no? And that would not include the polluted sacrifice, none of that. A clear cut going against the commandment of God, against the mitzvahs.
They are described as being righteous. And as you have said yourself, Moses explains righteousness as confession and belief. So
Steve, you literally are on the verge of getting kicked out. Can you answer the question without getting on?
Don't worry about it. I'm answering your question, but you're not happy.
So
no,
kick me out. I asked you specifically, is there any sin of theirs that you can point out, yes or no?
No.
No, perfect. So they obeyed the commandments of God blamelessly, correct?
That's your assumption. I'm telling you they had faith and confessed.
I'm literally going by the text. I'm literally going by the text.
You read what Moses said earlier, that the keeping the law is not far from them. And that is explained as having faith and confession. So I don't understand what you don't understand.
No, that's the way. That's the explanation from Paul. That's not the explanation from the text. the context of Deuteronomy chapter 30 is obeying God's laws and his commands and
Well,
his statutes,
well, in that
and that
case,
it's not
we,
too far away from you. Wait, Paul misinterprets this. Paul misinterprets this, and he understands it as a confession of faith. Just like how Paul
no,
misunderstands that of Abraham, right? And how James gives us a different understanding. James tells us that Abraham was saved by his faith and good works. Paul tells us that that Abraham was saved by that of his faith alone in Romans chapter 4, verse 1 through 5. James tells us something completely different in James chapter 2, verse 14 through 26. So whenever it comes to Paul understanding and interpreting the Old Testament, do not trust him, bro. Do not trust him in every single way, shape, and form and regard whenever we have contradictory understandings from that of the disciples who lived and who
I
spoke
wish you
and who
would let me
taught or
explain
who
to you
learned
why
with Jesus.
you're wrong. I wish you'd let me explain to you and show you why you're wrong, but you're not letting me actually make the arguments. Unless I'm actually saying the exact words you want, then you're not accepting any answer. There's no way to have a
No,
conversation.
Steve.
How can two people converse like that?
Steve, I'm getting tired of your victim blaming, and I'm gonna tell you why. Because here's the problem with you. You keep saying that, oh, we're not allowing you to answer and stuff like that. You keep saying, oh, we want you to say the answer that we want you to say. No, we actually want you to just address the points directly. Because if you ask me, Ali, where are you from? And then I say my favorite food is XYZ, I might
I'm not doing
no,
that,
no,
dude. I'm not doing that.
listen. I've been listening this entire time, and every time the brothers ask you a direct question, you try to go to some different points, even to the point where many people, even many people on the guests, they've been confused because you keep going from different place to different place, meaning you're not answering the brother's question directly. We've got no problem if you disagree. The problem is when the brothers ask you a direct question, or if they're talking about a specific topic, just address the topic. If you want to explain, let's say the brothers ask you a question. If you want to explain, you can explain after you've given a direct answer. But what you want to do is explain first before you even give the answer in the first place. And that's the problem. If the brothers ask you, did this happen? You can say
So I want to
yes, or
explain the
you can
answer
say
without giving
you
an
can say
answer.
yes. You can give the answer first and then explain why you answer. But the thing is, give the answer first directly, and you're not doing that. So
I
can you
don't think
start
you know
doing
how
that now?
conversation works, dude. I'm explaining my answer.
No, a
And you're saying that
conversation.
I'm explaining before I answer.
You're explaining an answer you haven't given. That's the
Yeah, that's
problem.
what I'm saying.
Well, when I
Anyway,
have been trying to give a
he
verse
already
or
knows
something like
the
that.
answer, and this is the whole point. This is why we're not going to go anywhere with him. So, Brother Abdulaziz, you wanted me to open up Acts 21. Go right ahead.
Yeah. Steve, we understand your interpretation. I get it. So the prophets of old and the way Paul interprets the prophets of old, and you agree with this interpretation, is that everything is by faith, everything is by spirit, everything is by grace, everything is by not specifically good works or not specifically that of customs and traditions that are ordained by God, but that of love and that of mercy and that of kumbaya, basically. Right? I get it. I understand what
I
you're saying,
don't
Mr.
think
Steve.
you've been fair with me, guys. I
I,
don't think
I,
you've been
I
fair
I
with me
understand what
at
you're
all.
saying, but we're telling you, Steve. We're telling you, Steve, that what you're affirming and what you're like every single time, if we give you the understanding of James, or if we give you the understanding of the New Testament, if we give you the understanding of the Old Testament, or if we give you the understanding of the prophets, you keep going to Paul,
But you're not
Paul.
letting me
Right?
explain anything.
Bro, I understand. I understand your explanation. I understand your explanation. Right?
In,
I understand your explanation. I've heard it 100 times over. I understand. All right, Steve.
I've gone.
And
I
I
went
and
to
I got you. It's a common Christian
Jeremiah
interpretation.
9, and you're now accusing me of just going Paul, Paul, Paul. You're
No,
not being honest,
Paul's
dude.
usage. Yeah,
You're
Paul's
not
usage.
representing me fairly.
I got
You're
you.
not allowing me to represent myself,
I
and
got you.
you're being dishonest by saying I'm just going to Paul. When I'm trying to go to Jeremiah, I'm trying to go to Exodus,
I know.
I'm trying to go to Ezekiel.
I'm
I want
not
to go
saying.
to
I'm saying you're
Genesis.
going to
I've
Paul's.
got so much that I want to go
I got
to.
you. Steve. I'm telling you, you're going to Paul's interpretation of the
Your
Old Testament.
brother is the one that
Okay.
was saying that Moses says that the law is not far, okay? Your brother brought that up. I was using his own words
Yeah.
to say that what it means. I
Okay.
didn't even bring that up.
Okay. Do you believe real quick, Stephen, so we can actually progress? Please, brother. Stick with me. Do you believe that the Mosaic customs, traditions, ordinances, and laws were to still be continued after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection?
As I've explained, I think that the Mosaic law is statutes that were not good from the day that they were given. They were a curse given as a punishment for making the golden calf idol. And that by accepting Jesus and believing in Jesus, that he set us free from the law, that we are no longer under the curse and that we can then be free. So I perfectly believe that Jesus gave us freedom from the curse that Israel took on themselves when they worshipped the golden calf.
I got you. Right. Even though I wouldn't agree with you, sure. I get that that's your understanding, that's your interpretation. I would say that the laws in Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 25, where God is commanding for them to sacrifice their children, and God is boasting about giving them laws and
God
teachings and
doesn't
rulings.
command them to sacrifice their
Right,
children.
as Ezekiel chapter 20 verse 26, right? He's talking about how he gave them abhorrent, right, and horrid laws, right,
It's,
to
it's
where they could
saying
not
that
succeed,
it's
to where they
saying
could
that
not succeed. No,
under the
he
law,
gave them these
all
rulings. I got you,
the
Steve,
children will end
please.
up in hell. They'll go to hell because they will fail the law and they'll be guilty.
No.
That's
This
what it
is God
means.
boasting, right? This is the horrible reality of these passages in Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 25, right? If you read it contextually, you would understand that they broke the Sabbath, that they started worshiping idols, right? So
Yeah.
God said, screw this. God said, screw this. I'm going to give them horrid and
Just quickly, guys, a little interruption there. Just going back 30 seconds ago, he said something about God actually. He was saying that in Ezekiel 20:26, he's saying that God actually commanded them to sacrifice their children. He said that earlier, and he's implying it again just there. But that's in a stark contrast to Jeremiah 19:5. It says here, they have built also the high places of Baal to burn their sons with fire for burnt offering unto Baal, which I commanded not, nor spake it, neither came it into my mind. So they're misreading. Let me get up. So they actually read in an NIV. They got me reading an NIV on there, which I don't normally read. And it said there, the sacrifice of every firstborn, that I might fill them with horror, that they know that I am Lord. So that's what that's what we read there. But I actually read in the King James. It says, I polluted them in their own gifts, in that they caused to pass through the fire all that openeth the womb. Now, I would interpret that as to all of their children are going to go to hell because none of them are going to be able to actually keep the law. Verse, where are we? 25. So, wherefore I gave them also statutes that were not good and judgments whereby they should not live. So nobody's going to live by the law of Moses. And if nobody's going to live by the law of Moses, then it's in that they cause to pass through the fire all that openeth the womb. So it's not God commanding them to sacrifice their children. God never commanded that, which I commanded not, nor spake it, neither came it into my mind. So they're twisting that. Anyway, that's that.
grotesque laws, and I'm going to humiliate this people, and I'm going to
So
defile this people. And he gave
so
them
they had
laws
the
and rulings
they had the Ten
concerning.
Commandments,
So
and
they
then
had the
he
Ten
gave them,
Commandments, and then
and then
God.
he gave them the law of Moses, the
Okay.
Levitical law, 613 more laws, or 603
Okay.
more laws, because they already had
But
10.
look, guys, but like this is like the clear misunderstanding from that of like the passage, right? So I gave them other statutes, right? Other statutes,
It's
right?
603
Implying
in
that there were
Levitical laws.
prior statutes and laws, right?
10 commandments, 10
In Ezekiel,
commandments.
just stick with me. Just stick with me, Steve. All right. There's many commandments. There's many commandments that are given in the Deuteronomy. There's many
And that's the
commandments that are given in
statutes that are
Exodus. Many
not good.
commandments that were given.
That's the
Steve,
statutes
can
that are
you
not
Yeah,
good.
stop speaking over the
they're all
brother?
good.
He let you
They're all
finish
good.
what you were saying.
It's,
Stop speaking over him. You're
it's,
being
it's fine.
rude,
It's fine,
Steve.
Yacham.
Let him.
Exactly. Okay. So this is very important, right? If you read it contextually, Steve, you would understand that here, yeah, because they had not, Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 24, because they had not obeyed my laws, but had rejected my decrees and desecrated my Sabbaths, and their eyes lusted after their parents' idols. I gave them other statutes that were not good and laws through which they could not live. And verse 26, and I defiled them. I defiled them. God is boasting. I defiled them through their gifts, the sacrifice of every firstborn. Right? They had to sacrifice every firstborn that I might fill them with horror so they would know that I am the Lord. Right? This is God's revenge on his people. Right?
I know what you're saying. God gave
After he
the
gave them
10
these pure rulings and
commandments, and
teachings,
then
and after
after
they
they
gave him
made
this
the
real
golden
quick,
calf,
Steve, I'll let you Steve, I'll let you explain. I'll let you explain, please. Just let me finish. Let me conclude my point, and then you can respond for as long as you want. Okay? Please. All right. So after God gave them the statutes and the commands that they were supposed to obey, and they threw and they basically spat on the rulings and the teachings that God had given them, right? And they broke their Sabbaths, and they broke their covenant, and they broke their basically their agreement and their bond with God, to where they weren't supposed to commit any sort of idolatry. God gave them horrid and grotesque and vile laws, right? Like one of them being mentioned is the sacrificial system of their children, right? To where they could not succeed, right? God says, to where that they could not live, right? So this is God's punishment upon them. Okay, this is God's revenge upon them. Circumcision isn't revenge upon Moses. Circumcision is a commandment that was given to Abraham. Okay, circumcision was given to Abraham. For you to say that this law and this ruling is a curse upon them, no, bro. This is anything but. This is anything but. Right, and we would see, right, which is very important, that the disciples, and this is like going along with my first question, right, that after Jesus was crucified and resurrected, the disciples still continued living in obedience to the Mosaic customs, traditions, ordinances, and laws. Right. If you go to Acts chapter 21, verse 18 through 24. Right. So you can give me your interpretation so far, and then I'd like to go to that passage, Acts chapter 21, verse 18 through 24, and we can just continue from there. Right. And I'd like to show you how the disciples were still living in obedience and servitude to the Mosaic law. On the contrary, Paul wasn't, and Paul was teaching to move away from it. So please give us your 2 cents, and so we can progress, Mr. Steve.
oh, well, as I explained earlier, anybody that actually knows the timeline in the Bible, then God gave a verbal command to the Israelites to leave Egypt and to enter Canaan, and that they listened to the voice of the spies, and they got stuck in the wilderness for 40 years. They first received 10 commandments in the wilderness. And the brother was saying, they despised my statutes. They went against my Sabbaths. They went after their father's idols. And that was when they made the golden calf. And then after they made the golden calf, God gave them terrible laws, despicable laws, and that is the Levitical law, the law of Moses, the full lot. In there it says that you can beat your slave, but as long as your slave survives, then it's okay. And that's disgusting. That's a vile law, and it's one of the statutes that is not good that God gave
Okay, is circumcision one of those statutes? Steve, real quick, just so I can understand this.
as you said, circumcision was given to Abraham, but we've already
Exactly.
explained that Jeremiah first taught that the circumcision that matters is the circumcision of the heart, and
I got you.
Paul confirms what Jeremiah was teaching. So we've
I
been
got you.
over that one.
I got you. Okay. So this is very important, right? So now what we're trying to show you is contrast, right? Contrast. Right now, what we're trying to show you is that Paul contradicted that of the disciples, that of the people who walked with Jesus, that of the people who lived with Jesus, that of the people who ate and drank with Jesus, right? That of the people who learned, right, face to face with Jesus, right? Paul was one who went on the garden. Paul was one who went to the road to Damascus and saw Jesus in the vision of a light. Right. So I would trust that of the disciples who were very close to Jesus within his life and his ministry over that of Paul, who can't seem to tell us one detail about the historical Jesus and his life and his ministry and his teachings. Right. So in
Paul
Acts
had
chapter
a
21.
supernatural awakening, though.
Okay,
He had a supernatural
yeah, okay,
experience.
but so did James. So did James. James had an interaction with what
And
we would say a prophet who was able to do supernatural things. Right.
Paul and James and the
James
Elijah.
James and Peter had access to a man who had a supernatural and divine revelation. Right. So of course you could say that. Yeah, you could say both of them are inspired, but if they're contradicting one another, then we
No,
cannot say that both
I
of them are
would
inspired.
dispute that.
It's either one of them is
Paul
lying.
and James does not contradict
Okay.
each other.
So
If you
let's read right
understand
here.
it in context, they don't contradict
Please,
each other.
Mr. Steve. Okay, then please help me out here. Okay, so this is Acts chapter 21, verse 18 through 24. Okay, so the next day, and it's on the screen if you would like to read along with me, Mr. Steve. Right?
He fears for his life, so he does what they say.
Okay, but think about this. But this is important, right? And like fearing for your life isn't a good cop out because we know the disciples were martyred, right? So if they feared for their life and if they felt like they had to lie upon what they had to live in obedience to, then the whole martyrdom story goes into the trash because these people
But,
died for
but,
their beliefs.
but
They didn't die for
there's
concealing. They didn't die for concealing or for falsely teaching and preaching their beliefs, right?
there's
So
a
this is very
verse
important.
somewhere where Paul admits to telling a lie to further the gospel. I can't
Romans,
remember what verse.
Romans,
Yeah,
Romans three
so
seven.
you
Romans three
know the verse.
seven.
So
Yeah.
and this is an example of
No,
him
no, but that's not
living a
bro. That's
lie
not
to
good, Steve.
actually
That's not good.
survive and
That's not
further
good.
the
That's
gospel.
not good. That's not good.
And for me it's good. It's good enough for me.
No, that's not. But bro, these are people who are promised paradise, right? These are people who have been given revelation, who have paradise at the end of the tunnel, at the end of the light. Why would they lie? Why would they masquerade? Why would they deviate? Why would they trick? Why would they lie? It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so this is very
These are
important.
the
Let's just read.
people that are supposed to judge the 12 tribes of Israel along with Jesus.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so Steve, this is very important, right? The next day, Paul and the rest of us went to see James, and all the elders were present. Paul greeted them and reported in detail what God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. When they heard this, they praised God. They said to Paul, "You see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed, right? And they are all zealous for the law." So zealous means excited, right? They're excited. They want to live in obedience to the law. They want to live in servitude to the law that God has given them. They want to observe the customs and the traditions. They want to be different than that of these people around them who are ridden in their filth, who are fornicating in the streets like donkeys, who are drunkards and basically numbskulls, who are doing nothing pertaining, no works, no fruits. They bear no fruits, right? They're just living aimlessly. They act as they will. Right? They act as they will. These are the people that are surrounding them. And these Jews who have came and accepted that of the religion of Christ, right, have turned away from all of these schisms, have turned away from all of this deviancy that the Jews were teaching, have turned away from that all of what the people around them have been teaching, and they want to accept God, his covenant, his rulings, and his teachings, right? So you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed, and they are all zealous for the law. They're excited to keep the law. And they have been informed that you teach all the Jews who live among Moses or who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to the customs, our customs. What shall we do? They will certainly hear that you have come. So do what we tell you. There are 4 men with us who have made a vow. Take these men, join in their purification rites, and pay their expenses so that they can have their heads shaved in accordance with the Mosaic physical laws, the purification ritual, the shaving of the heads. Right? The purification offering, sacrificial offering. Take these men, join in their purification rites, and pay their expenses so that they can have their heads shaved. Then everyone will know there is no truth in these reports about you, but that you yourself are living in obedience to the law. Mr. Steve, you don't believe that Paul lived in obedience to the Mosaic customs, traditions, ordinances, and laws, especially when it comes to circumcision, right? Because this is one of the main contentions that they had. They have been informed, right? Read what's highlighted in blue. They have been informed that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or observe the customs, right? This is very important. So we need to see James is telling his people to live in servitude and obligation and in duty to that of the Mosaic law. Follow the customs, follow circumcision, right? If Paul is teaching circumcision, right, the same way that James is teaching circumcision, why is there contrast here? If James is teaching circumcision of the heart, which God forbid, James never even came near this idea that we only had to have circumcision of the hearts and not circumcision of the flesh, right? God forbid. And Paul denigrates him later on. You would see in Philippians chapter 3, verse 2, he'd say, watch out for those dogs, those mutilators of the flesh, for we are of the true circumcision group. We are of the true circumcision group. We have the circumcision of the hearts. And then he starts boasting how he lived in obedience to the laws his whole life. And now they're all considered garbage. It's all considered filth, worthless, meaningless. I'm saved through grace through faith. Right? So this is
So
Paul's idea and
you're
understanding
talking a
of the
lot,
doctrine
but
of
to be
salvation.
honest, I don't
Right?
actually understand what you're actually trying
Go
to
ahead,
say.
Steve.
Like,
Go ahead,
what's the
Steve.
point you're actually making?
Go
What
ahead.
do you want me
So
to address?
So James is teaching to live in obedience to the Mosaic customs, traditions, ordinances, and laws when it comes to physical circumcision, correct?
Where's James teaching that?
Beautiful. Okay, let's read it one more time. So they have been told, they have been informed that you teach all the Jews. So is James calling out this
But
belief, right?
I've
Is
explained
James calling
that
out this belief?
Paul
Okay,
did
so you
no
agree. So
harm
you
by,
agree.
by
So you
doing
agree,
that. So
Steve. So you
Paul
agree,
went
Steve.
along with it.
So
Paul went
you
along with
so,
it.
so you
I
agree.
have
So you
no
agree.
issue.
So you
That
agreed.
doesn't.
So James was advocating, and James was making sure
No,
that Paul lived in
James isn't
obedience to the law.
advocating. He's telling you a story that happened to Paul, where Paul happened to go along with the dictates that were being told to him by the rulers at that time. Otherwise, he was going to find himself in trouble.
Why
James,
would he find himself in trouble? Why would he find himself in trouble?
because they were going to kill him if he.
Why? They were
Because,
gonna kill him
because
for living in observance to the law.
they perceived that he was teaching a message that they weren't happy with. He himself used to kill Christians. He
Yes,
knew the
and rob the
danger that
churches.
he knew the danger that he was in by teaching what he was teaching.
Mr. Steve, do you know what an argument from silence is? That's exactly what you're doing right now, okay? Show us in the text what you're claiming. Else it's an argument from silence, fallacious.
Just want to pause out there. I'm going to go back. Listen to what he says. He says, show us from the text. When I get the chance to talk, I ask him to see a text, and he won't have none of it. And at that point, I kind of give up, and I'm on for another couple of minutes afterwards. But I've clicked back, listened to him say, show us from the text, and then listen to my answer when I try to actually show him from the text.
That's exactly what you're doing right now, okay? Show us in the text what you're claiming. Else it's an argument from silence, fallacious. That's not
Well,
what
I'm
the text
asking you
says.
to show
The
me in
text
the text.
clearly implies that he actually admitted that he was wrong, and how we know this is because he remained quiet and he was about to do what he was asked to do.
Exactly.
And this is not just nobody, this is James, the brother of Jesus, along with the other elders, okay, that talked with Jesus, and they learned directly from Jesus. How come they don't have that same understanding that Paul does?
Exactly.
Ironically, it was one of you guys that actually knew the verse that when I didn't know the verse, and you said that it wasn't necessarily contextual for this, but Paul was prepared to tell a lie in order to further the gospel. I have no issue with this verse, and I don't understand what I think you're trying to say that this says something it doesn't.
We'll break it down. We'll break it down very simply, Steve, please. So James lived in obedience to the law, correct?
No.
Every single church
Depends
father.
what law you're talking about.
Wait.
If
So
you're
James.
talking about confession,
No,
belief in your heart
no.
and confession by the mouth, then James is in obedience.
Why did he summon him?
Yeah, exactly. They
Who
summoned
why
him?
was he summoned?
James and the elders. James and the elders.
No,
they summoned them.
no,
They summoned
it's
them,
not.
Yes.
It's not James and the elders that summoned him.
Yes.
Read the verse.
We went to see James and the elders.
When we arrived at Jerusalem, the brothers and sisters received us warmly. The next day, Paul and the rest of us went to see James, and the elders were present. Right, so all the elders were present. Okay, it's not talking about James. It's talking about all the elders.
James.
Paul
Yes,
greeting
James.
them and reported in detail that God had done. Where is it? But it's the elders. It's not James.
It is James with the elders. They're all in unanimity. They're all in agreement that they have to live in obedience to the law. Bro, you need to read the letter. You need to read the letter of
over
James.
Here? Yeah. Who's the one doing all the talking? Who is James?
I don't know. James doesn't teach obedience to the law, because if you look,
he doesn't teach obedience to the law.
Go to James chapter 1:25. Go to
the epistle of James. What does he say about the law in chapter 2? You want me to open that?
In chapter 2:10 and read 2 to 10 to 2:12. Read there.
Right.
And I think
we'll go over there.
1:25 as well.
Can you
God, you just brought it up. Let's bring it up now.
Yeah, of course. I'm definitely
going
to go over there. But can you clarify to me who is the one doing the talking over here, and what was the authority of James according to Acts?
Let's go to an earlier chapter.
So that's me. I've just had the verses on the screen, but obviously I was trying to mention those verses. They haven't come up on screen. They will never come up on the screen, and the conversation will end before they come up on the screen. But this Fawad, he asked me to show scriptures and stuff. They didn't want my answers. The Bible teaches itself. One scripture will explain another scripture, and you have to understand the whole Bible, and it will become together as one big picture and explain itself. But if they're not going to let me actually show verses to explain other verses, then there's no way that you can teach them. You can't show them.
Can you
James,
answer the
so that
question?
we can
Stop
understand
waffling.
a later
Stop
chapter in James.
waffling.
Because if we
Stop
start at the
waffling.
beginning, then it's probably a better idea to start at the beginning, isn't it?
Okay, so stop waffling. Okay, we've heard you're waffling for long enough. You're really getting on my nerves. You're pissing me off because you're not answering a single straightforward question. Okay,
You're not prepared to study the Bible. That's your problem.
What was the
To
authority of
study the
James?
Bible, you have to look at the whole of the Bible.
Mr.
One
Steve, Mr.
scripture
Steve,
explains
Mr.
another
Steve,
scripture. And if
Mr.
you're not
Steve,
prepared to look at the
Mr.
Bible,
Steve,
then you are the
Mr. Steve,
problem.
I
Just
am
kick me
looking
out.
at your Bible.
Yeah,
The thing
go
is,
on.
you're reading
I'm
into the
pissing you off.
Bible, and
Go on.
I am
Kick
actually.
me out then.
Okay,
Go on then.
Mr.
See you, big man.
Keep quiet. Keep quiet. Keep quiet. Okay. Now, can you answer this question? What was the authority of James? Why is he the one doing the talking over here? Under what authority is he doing the talking? Explain that to me.
Your questions are dumb. You asked the wrong questions.
Yeah. All right. Get out of
You're
here.
wasting your time. Yeah.
Yeah.
This
Get out
is
of here.
this is a key important question.
Get out of here.
He doesn't want to. He doesn't want to.
He's an idiot. He's
understand it the way the disciples understood it. But heck,
That's it, guys. That's the end of that one. I hope you enjoyed it. God bless you all, and like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And I'll see you on the next one.